Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 with Nora Almeida. I've been sending out the first round of guest invitations to be on the podcast, and she was one of the first people to respond with a yes. And soon after, we did the interview. So I'm sharing her episode first because Nora is the very first person I interviewed for Meet Me at the Throughline. And I'm pretty excited to kick the podcast off with a swimmer because swimming and just being a better, stronger swimmer is one of my greatest dreams. And I literally adore swimmers and love seeing what kind of swim schools and swim offerings and experiences are out there. Before I talk more about this episode, I would like to share more about today's guest. Nora Almeida is an urban swimmer, performance artist, educator, and activist based in Lenapehoking. Her art explores intersections of archiving, environmental investigation, and spatial disruption. Recent public artworks: Last Street in Gowanus in 2021, Land Use Intervention Library in 2022, Creek to Cavities of the Heart, which is ongoing, and Open Water, which is also ongoing, focus on relationships between people and environmentally disturbed post-industrial waterfront spaces. I met Nora in New York City, where I used to live for a long time, and I've been following her swimming journey on her Instagram account for a while, where she shares photos of her swimming experiences and open water reports, which details like the state of the water body she's in, what the weather is like, and other information. I hope Nora writes a book or something about her swimming adventures in New York City, Latin America, and wherever else she goes, because I love reading about her swimming experiences. And swimmers in general have such interesting perspectives and, concerns. I'm actually really sad that I never even thought about going to a pool or taking swimming lessons in the city when I lived there, for years. I just went to the ocean to wade in the water, not necessarily to swim. And the last time I was in Staten Island last summer, when swimming was on my mind, I was so close to going to the pool in Faber Park in Port Richmond. So close. But then life whisked me away. In this episode, Nora talks about pool access in New York City and when she became an open water swimmer in 2020, when the pandemic started. If you're not sure what an open water swimmer is, that just means, I looked this up on Google, someone who swims in natural bodies of water like lakes, oceans, or rivers, instead of swimming pools, which are often contained spaces that have walls, maybe lanes, and maybe there's a set temperature. I see Nora's swimming adventures as epic. That's just me. I do. Epic, adventurous, and magical. But she wanted to share that she struggles with chronic pain. And I'm so glad she shared this because it's a great reminder not to romanticize people's lives. It's like, yes, people can absolutely, through our eyes, be doing dope things, but they can also be going through stuff, you know? I really appreciate how much of a ritual swimming is for Nora and how it's such a significant part of her life. I think at one point during the episode, she says that swimming is church for her, or swimming is her spiritual practice or religion. There's so much I could reflect on, but I'll leave it there. I'm excited to keep following your journey, Nora. Cheers to more swimming adventures in New York City and beyond. All right, listeners, if you can/want to, please take your time listening to this episode. Make a cup of tea at home, find a cozy cafe, or listen on the go. Either way, I hope you find at least one thing in this episode that is interesting, sparks your curiosity, or is helpful or inspiring in some way. Until next time. Welcome to the podcast, Nora.
Thanks for having me, Simone.
Yes, I'm really excited to start Meet Me at the Through Line, and I'm really grateful for all the first-time guests that are joining. And I'd love to know before we jump into questions, how are you doing?
Yeah, day by day, I feel like, a lot of ups and downs. Trying to surround myself with a lot of community and think about, what actions that I can be involved in or what kind of generative spaces that I can be involved in because it's a scary time. I'm trying not to yeah, a lot of times I feel like, things like permeate my body and soul. So trying to think about what energy I take in and give out, because that's, I think, an important practice for making connections and supporting people during hard times, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, I love that. I really resonate with that, and I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think it's great to like tell this to each other, to vocalize this out loud, so other people who might be feeling the same way can hear this. And so, yeah, we could just jump right into questions. I've been following your work for a while and have loved watching you share your open water reports and your Instagram stories of your swimming experiences. And I'm just like filled with so many questions. I don't know where to start, but I will say the first question I have is, can you take us through your journey from when you first started swimming to now? Like, I know maybe there's a lot in that, but I'd love to know, what has this swimming journey been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can think about it as phases. Like I grew up swimming, I grew up swimming, just like learned when I was young and kind of learned at summer camp, more like a communal swimming practice. And then I swam competitively, like when I was from ages like 11 through high school. And then I really didn't swim for like a little while. Like when I was in college, I was, doing other things, having a really good time and just readjusting to being in different spaces and who I was and new community and all that stuff. So I started swimming again when I moved to New York. Um, and I didn't have a lot of money at that time to like join a private pool or anything. So I was swimming at the parks department, which is just like super inexpensive, but it's like really crowded. So like the culture of swimming in New York is like insane, really. If you're trying to go to the like rec center and like I went to a bunch of different ones to find like the one that felt like more comfortable and like tried different times of day. So the pool that I like found that I liked the most, that was an indoor one, was the one in Chelsea. And I walked by it this week, so I was thinking about that. I mean, it was always packed, but it was like a really beautiful pool with natural light. And so I was swimming like sometimes, and I would go to the outdoor pools sometimes in the summer, just like Parks Department style. And then I had a job, um, finally a full-time job, that's one of the reasons that I was kind of struggling, right? After I graduated from my library science program. And even when I was in my library science program, had access to a different pool that was like, it was empty sometimes. It was just at another university because they didn't have one at the university where I went to. So yeah, during that time I just started swimming more because I had access to like pools that were like empty some of the time or
That's
like,
so nice.
yeah, so I was working at CUNY at Baruch and they had a pool. So I started swimming like more regularly because I could swim on my lunch break from work. And then I think one thing that's important to like talk about in relation to like my swimming, that's just part of it, is that it is like a really like important like ritual and like spiritual and regenerative practice for me, but I also am a compulsive swimmer, and so I have hurt my body a lot from swimming and I do like deal with some chronic pain issues. So like I feel like sometimes people see like pictures of me swimming everywhere and they think, like, oh, that's amazing, routine, but like there is this other thing where like every morning I do physical therapy and need to do like maintenance acupuncture, and like if I swim too much, like I am hurt. So
Wow.
I really think my swimming journey, like as it is right now, changed a lot because of the pandemic, because I was swimming pretty much every day. And then the pandemic closed like every pool, you know. And I used to sometimes
Gosh.
swim like in the outdoor pools, and I used to definitely sometimes swim open water in the summertime, but I wouldn't say like before the pandemic that I was like a hardcore open water swimming person. I love the water. I grew up in next to the water and next to the Narragansett Bay, and so like spent my life around water, but really just didn't have like the same kind of outdoor swimming practice that was like, you know, it's not really about exercise to me. It's more about the ritual that's the compulsive thing. So yeah, so I really didn't know what to do. I like researched on the internet, like secret pool. I was like, what are the like professional swimmers doing? And they were like swimming in these like infinity pools in their like homes, you know, that have like the jet. So you like, you know, like just even everyone, no one could swim in a pool. So I like, it was March, you know, when everything shut down. So it's pretty cold here in New York. So I bought like a wetsuit on the internet, and then kind of thought about my body and like when I might be able to like try to start, because the water then is still like in the 40-degree, really cold, like ice. So I tried to go for my birthday, which is like the second week of May. And you know, I had fear because I was like, it's cold, you know, this water is cold. And so I got in, and I had the wetsuit. It was like the first time I wore it, but I felt really uncertain about like the
Wait,
cold.
was that in the bathtub?
No, no, no. This
Sorry.
was a, yeah, no, no. Actually, so when I started swimming like open, you know, outside.
Okay.
So you know, I bought the wetsuit, and then they were actually policing the beaches here in New York City, the city beaches, because there was like no gathering. You know, it was like really hardcore pandemic times, like early May, just like in 2020. So I was like going to the National Seashore where it wasn't policed. So I would like ride my bike like 13 miles because like taking the train was like off the table, and then you know go swimming like on an empty beach that was cold. And I didn't really, a couple of times I did go, even though they had like cops patrolling the boardwalk at Brighton Beach and Coney Island, which is just more accessible. Like I could get there more quickly on my bicycle. It was like a little bit less of a journey. But yeah, then you'd have to just like run away from the cops and into the water. Like you're like, I'm sorry, like they're not gonna follow you. So yeah, so then I met a couple other people who were like, wow, what are you doing? So I found a couple of other people to swim with in that time, but I didn't have like a formal swimming community. But I got really interested in the experience of swimming open water, in terms of like connecting to nature and like also like fear and like letting go of fear. Because you know, when
Mm.
you first start swimming open water, and even now, like when I go to a place that I've never swam, like I always feel afraid. Like there's so many uncertain things, like so many living, moving things in the water, that you just really need to be like really attuned to the water and how your body feels in it and how your body feels in general. And like what, you know, safety is super relative, I think. So a lot of like open water swimming at that time was about like feeling afraid and then like keeping swimming. And I was afraid of so many things. Like the pandemic was like hardcore in New York. So just like letting go of like other fear, like once you kind of let yourself relax and
Mhm.
everything. Um, yeah, so that's kind of how I started the open water stuff. And now I find that it's like I kind of think about swimming as like a kind of embodied research and like a way of understanding different swimming practices, like when I swim other places and talk to other swimmers or see the way that swimming culture works. And then just in terms of like getting to know different water by like going in it. And to me, it really takes like 20 minutes. So like, you know, it takes 20 minutes for you to like really be in the water, like for the temperature to start to change your body temperature, for your brain to sort of relax, for you to get over that any kind of initial like fear or like the assessment that you're doing at the beginning, where you're just like really noticing to make sure that you're like safe. And then like if it is safe, then like after about 20 minutes, then I find like I get like a rhythm, and then I can really connect to that environment, and then, feel really like free and learn things about myself and about the water and let go. Just let go of all my fear in the water, of my anxiety. I leave it there.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. A lot, I was thinking about a lot while you were talking. Just that like 2020 sounds sort of like a pivotal year of where you start exploring open water swimming more. And then I mean, I feel like I've experienced this when I've swam, but that is true about like the emotional experience of like going to a new water body or new waterway and submerging in the water for the first time, and like the fear that could come with that, and like the whole embodied process of like your body adjusting to the water. I really liked how you described how it takes 20 minutes for your body to relax, your brain to relax. Because I was going to ask you, um, yes, like what do you encounter or run into when you are in the water? Because I think before when I, talk to you, you talk about like you run into a lot of like trash or, but I'm interested in the trash, but also the marine life, like just that experience. You're in the water, you're swimming. What are you encountering in the environment?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where you are. I guess like the main, like obviously different water moves different ways and there's a lot of variables, but one of the main kind of like experience variables, I think that's like pretty distinct in any water is, and I would say for the most part, most waters you can't see. Like you can't see that far. There are some exceptions like the Adriatic Sea or like some parts of the Caribbean where you can really see. But for the most part, even like really clean water that's super deep, sometimes you can't see because it's just like so deep. So really with like some exceptions, like most of the time I swim in water where I can only see like my hands, maybe a little bit outside of my hands, but you can see like shapes or um I've had experience of definitely like encountering marine life. As you mentioned, like in Coney Island and Brighton Beach, like I have encountered garbage. And there's totally living things. I saw dolphins last year at Brighton Beach, like this past
Wow.
season, especially when it starts to get cold and they're like moving about. And so I've swam also like regular, so like a couple things that are like not as whatever, but they have like the moon jellies, like the little tiny, tiny jellyfish.
Yes, I
And
love
you just kind
those.
of usually just like poke some and they're kind of gross. They don't sting or anything, but sometimes you just get in and that day there's just like a bunch of them or like the current brought them in. The other main animal or living organism that I encounter in Coney Island, which is I would say where I swim the most often and have like a community down there, are like these things called like sea lice. They're like tiny microorganisms
Oh,
that just live in the water. They can live in seaweed and they mostly are totally harmless and you wouldn't even know that they were there unless they get into your bathing suit. And then they'll because then they're like trapped. So
oh my gosh.
then they'll give you a little tiny sting. So I've learned this. So I usually wear like a one-piece Speedo when I'm swimming in the pool, but I started wearing two-piece bathing suit outside because sometimes you just need to lose the top, so that you don't get stung by sea lice. But I've also swam with like amazing animals. Like I would say like one of the more memorable ones is swimming in Block Island. Like I meet my family there sometimes because like I grew up in Rhode Island, and I one time swam with a seal there. Um, so I was swimming and I like put my head up and like really close to me, like I don't know, like 10 meters or not even like really close, like so close to me, just like a few, like I don't
Oh
know,
my
like
gosh.
across the room distance. There's just like a seal and he pops his head up and like I look at him and he looks at me. And if I see a bunch of seals, I'm like, this is not a good place to swim because that could be like a shark place. But one seal, I'm like, okay. So I kind of looked at, we kind of did a whatever, and then I started swimming, and like I looked back, and he started swimming with me, and I swam with him for like several hundred yards, like maybe for like,
Wow.
5 or 6 minutes, and then I popped my head up again, and he popped his head up again, and then we swam a little more, and like I was like, this is amazing. So when I got out of the water, like this woman runs up to me, and she was like, "Did you know that you were swimming with a seal?" And I was like, "Yeah." It was like a religious
That's
experience.
amazing.
Yeah, so and then I've swam in like the most insane place that I've swam with animals. Like two places. One is like I swam in the Amazon last year, in the not in the Amazon River, but in the Tapiche River, which is very deep in the Peruvian Amazon. Um, and the local people who do swim there, whenever I go somewhere new, I'm like, do you local people swim here? Like, is the water safe? Definitely people don't like swim that much, but they use the water for everything. To bathe, it's their road. You know what I mean? To fish, like the water is like everything there. So, people go in the water, people wash their clothes in the water, and it is dangerous in several ways. One is that it has, depending on the water levels, because there's flooding and then the flood recedes. So the more shallow the water is, the faster the current moves, because the water then moves really quickly. So you have to be really mindful of the current. That's the only place that I've ever needed a rescue, because I like didn't realize how strong the current was, and I went a little bit against current and couldn't get back. I could like stay in place basically. And then in the Amazon, there's a lot of animals like piranhas and anacondas and like dolphins. I swam with river dolphins
Whoa.
there. So they have like those big
Oh my
gray and
gosh.
pink dolphins. And I did like see those in the water. I did not encounter piranhas or anacondas or crazy eels or snakes, which I did see around, but I didn't encounter them while swimming. And I mostly swam in place. Like the water would move and I would move against it, but I really didn't move very much. And the scariest thing that's in the water is alligators. Um,
Mhm.
and there was alligator poaching, so I saw like some alligator heads when I was like volunteering with this volunteering with this like eco org who were monitoring the habitat. So they would find like illegal poaching and like people like evidence that people had come and like poach alligators, and they would usually just take their skin and like leave like parts of them around. So I had like the alligator, the caimanes, that's how they call it there, and I just usually close my eyes the whole time there. You couldn't really see much. It was sort of like a murky, like green, like almost like a copper green color. And I often close my eyes when I swim for part of the time. And I guess the other craziest place to swim is just like the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is like so scary, like in terms of like it can just like take away you, sweep in and come.
Wow.
And so I haven't like seen that many like crazy animals like in the water with me in the Pacific Ocean. But I was just in Nicaragua over the like winter break from school and swam in the Pacific Ocean, and just the things that like are on the shore, like maybe a fisherman caught in his net or like just comes up on the shore. So like this crazy eel, like so crazy with like crazy teeth, and stingrays and stuff, and you just see them on the shore like dead, and then they just get swept out. So even though I didn't encounter like anything like that, I one like some of those jellyfish with like the strings, but they don't really sting too hard. I don't know. But I didn't see anything crazy in the water, just like invisible jellyfish sting. And then but you're just like, oh, this crazy eel with the teeth like swims here, and this crazy. So there's a
Wow.
lot of that. Um, yeah, and I've swam with fish in like clear water, but that's a different kind of thing. Oh, that's a different thing when you're in clear water, which is pretty rare. I would say that most of the water that you swim in, you really can't see that much, and you're just. And whenever I swam in the Galapagos. I did swim with like an iguana there. They only use their tails, and they look
Wow.
so big from underwater. Like they look huge, like, but they're not that big, but they just swim with their tails. um yeah, like a lot of times, even though they're not in the water, I swim with birds. There's like a cormorant, or yeah. So I mean, noticing what's alive with you, obviously tons of plants and seaweed sometimes and all that stuff. So yeah, I've swam with a lot of animals and human animals, many human animals in my life.
That sounds so like I want to use the word magical, but I want to think of another word. Just like connect, yeah, connecting with the environment. It just sounds um amazing. And I have a couple of questions. Like first, um, when I was reading over your website, I kept noticing like the phrase attuning to the environment. And so I'm thinking about how like if when you're swimming, because I've only swam in swimming pools. Maybe I have swam in a lake, but I didn't go underwater. So I do think it's interesting to like swim most of the time in water that you can't see in. So I'm just curious about like if you could talk more about the embodied experience of like attunement, what that means to you, what it feels like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different levels. Like in the initial, like kind of like attuning to the water is like an kind of like almost like an assessment, like trying to see when before I get in, like are there a lot of waves or, at Coney Island on the weekends at least, people put up like flags far out, like near the buoys where the boats can't go past that show the way the current is moving. That I try to read that a little bit if the tide's coming in or out. Like the safest time usually to swim in a body of water with a tide is right when the tide is changing. So like an hour before or an hour after, they call it slack tide because the current often changes after the tide changes. So there's almost like a moment in between the changing where it's a little bit less current. So some of the attunement is this kind of like noticing, right? So like noticing the environment, noticing how my body feels, noticing the temperature, like for sure. The more the water is like a comfortable temperature that I can be in for a long time without feeling cold, the more I can like kind of let go and feel one with the water. But if the water is cold, then I'm like always a little bit aware of like the coldness of my body and just worrying. Your body is like you're cold. You know what I mean? Like sends like alarm signals, and those are really hard for me to get past. So, that's something that is like hard for me. So, like, I would say that there, on the one hand, there's like this very explicit type of noticing that's part of an attuning. That's almost like an assessing the waterway. How is it moving? Like, should I go deep? Is there an undertow? Like, who else is in the water? What else is in the water here with me? So there's that. But then I think then there's like another process, which is more of like a rhythm, like getting into a rhythm with the water. So, if you think about like a meditation practice or like any kind of like exercise practice where you have to do a regular breathing practice as part of it, how your body sort of like sinks into this like breathing rhythm, and then that becomes almost like, oh, it almost becomes like a space, that you occupy, that your breath is like connected to the environment and your breath, and you feel very a part of the environment. So like swimming forces you to breathe very regularly, right? And you also have this thing where you're like, you can see the shore or you can see the horizon as you are breathing. And then when you're in the water, like otherwise, you can't really see very much. So I think not that many swimmers do this, but I close my eyes a lot. So I will sight to see I'm making sure I'm going the right way, and then kind of like open my eyes sometimes to like see where I'm at. But like in the open water, it's kind of nice to just like feel and close your eyes. So I think that then you feel really connected to the waves, and you move your body differently. So I feel like the attunement is like some of it is like the way that you move ultimately, or your body responds once you're connected to the water body. And then there's like this other practice of attunement that's really more about like safety or assessing like what is this experience going to be like, because you kind of have to like emotionally and mentally prepare. For me, especially the cold is the hardest thing for me. Is like cold water is like I'm not that good in the cold, and I have a hard time getting over the idea of like when cold is just sending me a signal that is like a fear, and when it is actually like your body is like danger, like you should get out, like it's too cold. And then, when you're in the water for like a really long time, like I find like if I'm in the water for more than an hour, um, then you end up with a different relationship where you are so attuned with the water that like you feel almost like far away from like your
Wow.
terrestrial self and your terrestrial life. And sometimes I lose perspective. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, am I really far away from the
Mhm.
shore? You know what I mean? Like, how far am I away from the shore? Um, and yeah, I feel like almost like, so attuned to that moment in the water that I feel like almost like dissociated from the
Wow.
shore. And like usually I feel physically farther away from it. And then sometimes I get afraid, like, can I ever get back to, you know
Wow.
what I mean? But yeah, usually I can. That's part of the initial attunement. I'm like making sure it's safe. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I just love listening to that. And also I don't like being cold at all. And it actually, yeah, I've never worn a wetsuit. And so just really quick, I'm curious, when you do wear a wetsuit, it are you still cold, even if you wear a wetsuit?
Um, I mean, I think that you're still always aware that the water is cold. And then, like, the kind of degree into which you get cold changes depending on how cold the water is and how long you're in. I think the 20-minute rule applies up to a certain point. There's a certain degree of water that's so cold that just feel immediately like, the wetsuit makes me feel safe from the cold because I have a circulatory disorder. It's like an autoimmune disorder. So it is actually dangerous for me to get very cold because my fingers and toes will like go white and numb. And I can
Hmm.
get like hypothermia or frostbite like really quickly. So there is like a real, but I find that it's like keeping my core warm is like necessary because it's not just like wearing a gloves or something. Because like when my core is warm, then like my like regular body temperature can kind of regulate itself, and then I don't feel as much fear. And I think some of it is about like feeling comfortable. So like I always wear a buoy. Um,
Hmm. I
and the
noticed
buoy,
that.
it's like a just an inflatable device. Like a little, almost like a little bag. It's like kind of like what you would see if sometimes if you go in like a kayak and they give you like a dry bag. It's a little bit like
Hmm.
that in that you can store things in it. I don't usually store anything in my buoy, but sometimes people who are doing long swims might put like, those little like smoothie that you can, this kind of thing, or a clip of
Wow.
water to it so that you have some, if you like get really tired and need to like eat something. um, or drink water can be, it's weird, but sometimes you get really thirsty when you're swimming in salt water. But the buoy to me is the number one reason to use it is it's not a flotation. It does float, but it's not like a saving life saving device. Um, they're usually very bright, so it's about visibility. So to me, the number one thing that's dangerous in water is boats. And so
Hmm.
being visible to boats is like really important. So I usually wear a very bright colored swimming cap and my buoy. And the buoy is also good because you can use it to float. So like after you get in, you can kind of see like, oh, is like the water moving this way or that way. I have plenty of friends that don't swim without a wetsuit until the cold. And basically, once it's like about below like 68 or 67, I have trouble staying in the water and feeling comfortable in the water and swimming and enjoying my swim without thinking about the cold. So I'll wear it. And then once it gets below 50, it's really hard for me to get in at all. And it also takes a long time to get the wetsuit off. So in that moment when the air is cold, then it's really hard to like maintain any warmth that you've kept in the in the wetsuit.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's sort of like I swam this year a couple times and it was like 65 without a wetsuit, and I felt okay in the water. I kind of pushed through, and I was like, I don't think it's dangerously cold, but then I'll like shake for like 2 hours afterwards. So there's just like I don't know, the cold is hard. I feel like the wetsuit does make me feel more comfortable, like I'm safe from the cold a little bit, but then you don't want to have a false sense of security. And there's like certain indicators, like if it's like below 55, like when you get in, a lot of people have trouble breathing because you like the
Hmm.
coldness will like take your breath away. Usually I get brain freeze.
Hmm.
You drink a smoothie too fast or something,
Oh,
where you're
wow.
like, yeah. So it's like I don't know. There's a lot of different schools of thought. But this year I went swimming the latest that I have ever gone. And a part of that is about community. So like swimming with other people, even though like you always swim alone. Like, do you know what I mean? Like you can swim with other people, but you're always ultimately like swimming alone. Um, yeah, but I swam with like a group of women who were all kind of trying to go into the cold a little bit together because there are a lot of benefits of cold water swimming. Like people use it for hydrotherapy. It's really good for trauma. You get like your blood vessels constrict, and then when they open up again, you get like euphoria, and it can actually be like psychologically healing. Like I totally believe this.
Wow.
So you know, it was cool to go with people. You feel a little bit safer, even if you don't swim totally in a pack or anything. But like someone would notice if you like didn't come back or like if you know or like you know you can also talk to someone like how are you feeling and
Hmm.
I can be like I'm feeling really cold like I'm going to go back or like I think I can go a little bit more and they might be like I think I can go a little bit more too and then you kind of go a little bit more together and there is some kind of like almost like a reality check like are we is this too cold
Yeah.
so yeah and then like there's a point like I swam the day after the election. It was like unseasonably warm here. And I was like, I'm going swimming, you know? And so I rode my bike to the beach and my friend texted me and he was just like really upset. And he's like, I've been out on my bike, just like moving. And I find when I'm like afraid or like need to like process stuff and I just like don't know what to do, like it's so overwhelming that just like being in motion is like really helpful. So
Mhm.
I swam the day
Totally.
after the
Yeah.
election and it was like cold, but like I felt like I needed to go in the cold that day. And then I swam that last weekend, like in that second weekend of November. And then I was like, okay, I think that's it for me. Hanging up my hat for cold water.
Wow. Oh my gosh. There was just so much in there. Like just listening to like the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual benefits of swimming, the ritual aspects of it. And I'm like, yeah, I want to get a wetsuit at some point and I want to get a buoy because I guess I never made the connection that I could use the buoy to float a little bit. Um, yeah, I just feel like when you share about your swimming, it's so inspiring. And I also think like it's inspiring and interesting. I'm trying to think of what word that like you're still swimming when you have chronic pain and when you don't when you don't like the cold, like physically you have to pay attention to how cold it is. And when you're grappling with fear, yet despite all of that, you try to find ways, or you do find ways to swim, not only in around New York City waters, but um, traveling to other countries and swimming. And I'm I think like the next question is you already spoke about it a lot, but first let me there's a lot coming to me. Um, let me just backtrack because I'm so excited to ask you like what's it been like traveling and swimming? But first, can you share like what's it been like living and swimming around New York City waters? You could maybe we can combine the questions. What is it like swimming in around New York City waters? And then what's your experience like when you travel to other countries? Like where have you been? You know, I know
Mm,
you talked about the Galapagos Islands.
yeah. Well, like New York swimming, you know, like I did a lot of swimming early pandemic alone or just like with one or two friends, like, and, um, you know, I swim in the pool here. I swam this morning. It's crowded. It's not the same. I really love the open water so much more now. Especially if you go before work, you know, there's like a competitive culture in the pools here. And there's like safety stuff that like the most dangerous things to me, like is all the animals and all the things. If as long as you're aware of like your ability and what how the water is moving and all that stuff, you're unlikely to get like eaten by a shark or something. Like you're so unlikely to get like really injured by an animal. The number two things that are really like the most dangerous things are like boats in the water, like especially boats that are like with a motor that can't see you, that are moving fast, or jet skis because the nose is really high,
Mhm.
and dudes in the pool. You know, dudes in the pool are Yeah, they're like sometimes I'm just in the pool. I'm like, this person is not aware of my body. I can just tell, you know what I mean, that
Mhm.
they're not aware of my
Yeah.
body. And I'm like, do especially because I've had surgery and I have chronic pain. I'm like, don't, don't touch my body. Like I need this. And so it like that's one thing about swimming in New York that it's very big, crowded. Um, and when I swim open water here, sometimes I'll go to the ocean, although which is great and beautiful. And I usually swim at Fort Tilden if I swim there. Other people swim there, but there's not like a swimming like community really in the same way as there is at Brighton Beach, which is on the bay. Um, so, like swimming in the ocean is just that you don't know if there's going to be so much waves and stuff that you might not really be like, not that you can't swim, but that it's a different kind of swimming. And I'm always aware of like my shoulder injury and just like being kind to it. And there's a certain amount of like turbulence that I enjoy. And then there's like amount that I'm like, this is
Mhm.
like too much like unpredictable movements and I could like injure myself. So, most of the time when I swim open water in New York City, I swim at Brighton Beach with the Coney Island Brighton Beach Open Water Swimmers, which is a club, but it's not like a competitive
Shout out to
club.
them.
Yeah, the Civos, they're and like it's just a cool community. Like I kind of like knew about them, but like I'm not really like into like club competitive things. So I kind of had this perception of it being more of like an exercise, like we go swimming thing. And I'm like, swimming's kind of more like a religious thing for me. But then I started going and it's just really a spot. You know what I mean? There's like one spot that you can like you go, everyone convenes there and on the weekends it's obviously busier, but then there's just like people like pretty much like in the summer season into the fall, like anytime I go there, there's at least like one or two people there. And so you like meet people, you sometimes you swim with people, sometimes you just talk and it's really age and like gender and race inclusive. Like it's a pretty like just like an open, cool community. Like sometimes I'll just be like, what are they doing? Like I went one weekend and like they were just doing a flotilla. Like they got all these pool floats and they were just like tied them together. They had like a dog with a life jacket, like think like fun things. So I usually swim I mean when I say I swim with them, sometimes I just go and swim alone. Sometimes I'll meet some people there and swim with them. Sometimes I'll get to the beach and people will be like, "Hey Nora, we're swimming like here. Do you want to come?" So it's a really cool community and that's usually where I swim here. I have not swam in the East River. I've been in the East River. I'm aware very much of the pollution here. Mostly the bay is like pretty safe to swim. I usually don't swim after it rains for like two or three tides at least, because we have combined sewer system here.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't swim in an estuary after a combined sewage overflow event, which is pretty much any time that it rains. The bay, is bigger. So, so I think about that. I did do a across the Hudson River swim upstate before, which was really cool because the Hudson is like so amazing.
That's
That was
cool.
nuts. Yeah, so that's like my New York swimming kind of like regular life, which I love. And yeah, swimming other places is like different. As I traveled last year, I swam in a lot of places in South America. I also swam in pools when I could find them, which was just interesting to see like how different cultures like do the pool thing. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I swam in a lot of different places. So like kind of like I talked a little bit about the practice of like assessing the water. And most of the times I swam alone, open water, or like alone with other people around or with, an iguana or whatever. Um, but the only place that I swam like kind of with I guess two places where I swam with the community, one in open water was in Lima, Peru, which is on the Pacific Ocean. It's pretty big waves. People surf there, but there's like a large muelle, like a big dock. It goes pretty far out, and it has kind of like an L shape. And so people swim like circuit swims there. So they'll put like buoys in the water, and so you can like swim with other people and like do a swim and have like a coach. So I did that because
Wow.
otherwise it's pretty boring just to swim alone. You know what I mean? In this like circular area. And that was kind of nice. Other people would go, you would show up at a specific time. I had this guy like Hans, whatever, Hunts, I think his name was. And I was only there for a week, but I swam with those folks every day. I was so excited to find them. I like went down to the water and I just saw a sign that said like nadadoras abiertos. And I'm like, what? You know? So, um, and then I swam in Cali, Colombia on a kind of like a swim team, I guess, in an outdoor
Wow.
pool. Because everywhere I went, I would try to find a pool that I could swim at, that I could access. For the most part, I was successful, some places more than others. I really wanted to swim in, if I was swimming in pools, in like a public pool if I could, just like with regular people, not at like a health club type of environment. So there it was just a public pool, and a lot of places in Latin America, they don't have like regular lifeguards. You have to pay for like classes, which I would say is like totally a barrier to entry. You know what I mean? Because it's some places just let you pay a little bit of money and you just go in the pool. But like a lot of places that I went, you like have to pay money for like a lesson. Um, and in Cali, I cut like a package, but like it was not really just lessons. Some people were there to learn to swim or to improve, but it definitely had a more like swim team culture. And I love the people there. Everyone was really friendly. Everyone was really into the outdoors. So they'd be like, I found this cool waterfall this weekend. And my coach was named Juan Manuel, and he was the best. And it was just really fun. Like I swam with other people. The pool was really deep. Um, yeah, and then also like just weird stuff. Like in Quito, I found a public pool that was really cheap, and like it was usually pretty empty, but like I went on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the military would train there. And they would be doing all
Wow.
sorts of weird drills, you know, like, and they would close some of the carols for that. And honestly, in Peru was just hard. Other than Lima, with yeah, the pools there were chaotic. There was no kind of regular culture of order at all. I got really hurt in a public pool in Peru because I got hit in the face. And that was like, and also I think the public pool, the water wasn't clean enough. Like I don't think they treated the water enough because I got pretty sick from water, which also is part of my water journey of traveling. But I got really sick from the water in Peru. Um, and it definitely, I think that it was some of it was the pool, some of it was my tooth dying from getting hit in the face and getting
Oh no.
yeah, like really got injured in this pool, in a public pool in Arequipa. And I should have known. In Arequipa, when we were there, they had water shutoffs. It's a desert. Like I was like, I should have known that there's like a water shortage. Like who knows where this water came from? And like, you know, it's a pretty like, you know, not like a rich place. And going to the public pools. So yeah, those are some like pool stories, I guess. But I swam in some river ecosystems. When I was just in Nicaragua, there's like a lot of volcanoes there. So I swam in this like magical laguna. There's all these volcanic craters, and so some of them are lakes or lagoons. They have the largest freshwater lake in, I think, the largest lake in Central America, and it used to be connected to the sea. So it has like all this cool, unique marine life and like all these minerals. So I swam in a laguna there that it's like a lake, you know, so it doesn't have any dangerous currents or tides. It's supposed to be bottomless, like it's the lowest point in Nicaragua. Um, there's no like predatory animals. There's no jellyfish. There's no boats. And there's just like a big volcano, and it's like big, but it's not like too big. I really wanted to cross it and I did hurt myself. I swam in it every day, but it has like magnesium and stuff in the water. So I like slept like amazing. It just felt so healing. And you could just swim in the middle, which like usually you can't just be like, bye, and just swim out. And so that was a really cool swimming experience that I had recently. So those are just some, but yeah.
I think I think there's something interesting about like how amazing or cool the experiences you've had, but also the realities of the different swimming experiences you've had. And so it's I think it's kind of helpful to think about your experiences and remember them as like dynamic and yeah, and the the land differences, the cultural differences, yeah, like just being in another country. And I think it's cool to go seek out different places to swim. Um, wow. I'm like, are you gonna write a book? I would buy
Maybe.
this book.
Maybe
A book of
someday.
your swimming?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I have a lot of different ideas. I like, related to my open water project, which I kind of don't know what to do with the next phase of. So I've been kind of thinking through that. I would like to do some writing around it, and I have like an idea to do like a cyanotype series using photos, like almost like a I don't know, like you see like a it could even be a little book, but I imagine it being like on a wall and there just being all of these like different images of like, because I always document my open water swims. Um, always take a photo, and part of that paying attention is like taking the photo and thinking about the tide, the current, the temperature, what else is in the water, looking out for boats. And like, then that's part of my like documentation afterwards. And then like, then the documentation is, temperature and stuff are added. So yeah, I mean, I am making art about water and interested in other people's water experiences, and especially, people who live near ecologically disturbed water, which I do here in New York, which is one of the ways that I like know so much about the contamination in our waterways. Um, or like people who have survived floods or had bad experiences. And, I meet a lot of people who grew up in New York City who don't know how to swim. And it's like how a lot of people don't know how to drive here. Even though it's an island and a water place, it's really hard to learn how to swim in open water. And it's really hard to get pool access. They do have like learn to swim programs, but they're really like competitive to get into. There's not enough of them. There's not a lot of outreach. So like I talk to a lot of people that aren't aware like of any of the kind of public swimming access that there is. So, I think that yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers like your question a little bit, but I'm thinking about
Oh,
all of these dynamic things in relation to like my practice and then how it relates to different places and other people's experience. And that's something that I am interested in making like some art and writing around. Um, and I'm kind of doing like within many other things I'm doing. Yeah.
no, I think that was a great answer. I feel like this is why I wanted to interview you. Like, I'm so interested in like the perspective of swimmers and your perspective specifically. Like, I didn't even think about like public swimming opportunities, swimming access, like it just, I think talking to swimmers can really help kind of raise people's awareness about swimming in different ways. Um, and so, okay. Um, I have a few more questions. So so you've been doing this project called Open Water. Can you tell us about that? Which is also connected to another project called Creek. Um, just curious about, yeah, Open Water and who your collaborator is with Creek, or yeah, it's yeah, I think
Sure.
it's
I
called
mean,
Creek, right?
yeah, Creek. Yeah. So I started doing the open water project. I got like a fellowship, which was really cool because it kind of made me write a proposal and think about a frame. Because I was already kind of doing this open water swimming practice. I had been doing a lot of like political work around flooding because I live in a filled marsh in Gowanus in Brooklyn, and it was upzoned, and there was like a lot of issues related to like ecological contamination and fear about water. And like that, obviously, there's like, all of these waterways in New York that are contained or controlled or disappeared. So I was already kind of interested in that work. And then, Hurricane Sandy was a long time ago, but there's still a lot of people who I think like their lives are still like continue to be impacted by that storm and by subsequent storms like Hurricane Ida and Henri. There's been, I think a lot of, people think about climate crisis, and in New York, one of the big threats from climate crisis, like that's very immediate, is flooding. And, a lot of the people who are most vulnerable to flooding are public housing residents because of just the history of New York and the way that they built public housing in like from the 40s and the 50s. Um, to be away from the center. And at that time, people didn't really want to live by the water because of like this idea that it was industrial, that there was contaminants. It was kind of a dumping place. Like New York wasn't treating itself like an island place, And so basically, like public
Mhm.
housing, because of like systemic inequity and racism, they were like, let's build all the public housing like far away from like far away from like subways, far away from the center, and put them like on the water. So a large percentage of like NYCHA properties are in flood zones and were affected by Hurricane Sandy. And I was interested in learning about the experiences of people who had extreme flooding, especially people who didn't have like agency to move and very little agency over like repairs because it's like a big bureaucratic public housing system. So I live pretty close to Red Hook. So I had this idea of like, the disruption of the pandemic had really changed my relationship with water and swimming. And so I was interested in the disruption of the pandemic and COVID. And I was also interested in the disruption of flooding and how these like things, these disruptions that were really about like ecological crisis had like changed or affected the way that people relate to water, or even how they live their lives in relation to being near the water, or they could have a specific relationship with a body of water that could have been foundationally altered by having like that water in their living room, like destroying their life. So yeah, so the project started that way. I like to do site-specific work so that you kind of get to know people who live in a place. Also, I usually do some like environmental stewardship. So like, cleaning a shoreline is a really great way to get to know it, like going there a lot, noticing just like different habitats, who visits that space, who uses that space, kind of giving back a little tiny bit at least by like cleaning, and even just being like, what's washing up here and like why, is a good investigative thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, I spent about a year working in Red Hook. I would just do pop-ups and I would do like oral histories outside with people in public parks. And I just would like situate myself usually near like some public housing, especially because like there are a lot of public housing like in these types of places. So I did pop-ups in Valentino Pier, which has like a lot more tourists and stuff visiting there. And then I did pop-ups in Kofi Park, which is just really next to the public housing and is mostly, I would say, like a place where like it's a gathering place for people who live in the public housing, especially since at that time, Red Hook is like the largest public housing complex in Brooklyn. It's like one of the second largest in the city. And at that time, there was no public space for people to sit down because they were still doing Hurricane Sandy repairs. And this was like in 2021, 2022. So like they basically dug up all of the property. People were still having issues with like mold and like flood damage in their apartments. And then, I talked to some like, older residents, like elders in the community who were like retired, and they were talking about how hard it is because like as an elderly person, there's like nowhere to sit down. Like they took out all the trees and the benches. So the park became like this place, I think, that everyone was going. And the park was completely underwater during Hurricane Sandy because it's actually a lake. I love stuff like this in New York. You're like, what?
Wow.
You're like, oh yeah, this park is a lake. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
just like, it wasn't just like the seawater coming. It was like, oh, this lake is back. So that's why the flooding there was so bad, even though it was a little more inland than some of the other places that were affected, but not affected in the same way. So to get attention to like just talking to me, first I just was working with one of my students because I had some funding. So I was also like, she lives in the Gowanus houses and I live in Gowanus. So we kind of connected over that. And she was interested in the project as a public housing resident. And I was able to like pay her to like assist me. And I was also just learning how to do oral history. Like I just like borrowed a recorder. Like I don't have like formal training in that. So we were like trying things out. And she's a really great photographer. So she was like a design student. So she designed some stuff for me and has taken really beautiful photographs of a lot of events. So yeah, first it was just me and Aisha just going to the public
Mhm.
park with my hand painted sign. And I just would use the "Would you swim here?" if I was by a water that you could see. And then would do the "What if this park was underwater?" And in Kofi Park, a lot of people were like, excuse me, this park was underwater. Like, let me tell you about it. So yeah, so I interviewed a lot of people. I really would start with like the question of like what body of water do you see the most like in your day-to-day life. Um, that was like just a helpful way to ground people in thinking about a specific water, I think, to talk about. Um, Asking them if that water was, swimmable and like what they think swimmable water is, and then asking them more about their relationship just with water in general and their experiences, kind of a little bit more free form. But those were kind of some of the central things that I was really interested in talking to people about. And yeah, so that was kind of the first phase. And then I added some stuff, and I'm always like picking up collaborators. I do all my work is collaborative. So I was able to get, a fellowship with Culture Push, and then I was able to continue my project, and I started working at Coney Island Creek. And at that point, my friend Jordan was like doing a big map with me, so people could map the water that they saw the most and like kind of code it. So I had like different colors for like wildlife, memories, feelings, dangers. Yeah, and my friend, okay, you got the recording going again. Yeah, so anyway, so that was kind of open water, and I had a couple of, collaborators. So my friend I was talking about this map that we were doing where people could map the water that they saw the most, which then people just love maps. They're like, what's this? And my friend Olive was kind of doing her own project about climate emergency and like the kind of the idea of a toolkit like that you would take with you, like what you would take with you if there was like a climate emergency. And she's been working with like, she's like a real climate person. Like she was working with Doctors Without Borders and like talking to people all over the world about flooding. So, her project was about this idea of like what's missing from the municipal toolkits that people have. Like what would you actually take with you if you're fleeing your home? So yeah, those kind of became part of the pop-up. And I was interested in Coney Island Creek because for a few reasons. It also has, a big public housing population. It has like a post-industrial like history. It also is like, there's a lot of manipulation of the land, like the filled lake and Red Hook. The creek used to be, go all the way through, and Coney Island used to at least be like almost like a barrier island. And then part of the creek was filled, and there's a lot of contamination down there. So I was just interested in that site. It's also like a protected wildlife, like a bird migration place. And because it's really calm water, it's also just like a lot of like fish like breed there. So it's like really alive at the same time as there's like a lot of garbage. And it's also a really free space. Like there's not that many of these in New York, but it's like a place that even though there are a lot of people live like densely in that area on the beach itself or the shore because it's not a real beach. It's really free. Like there's not a lot of surveillance, so people kind of just like do their thing. So there's like fishermen and people with bonfires, people dumping garbage. There's good and bad things about it. So I started visiting Coney Island Creek a lot, and my friend Iki, who I just know from some other collaborations, who's a videographer. She has an embodied videography practice. And she has her professional experiences in videography, especially for live performance. But yeah, for her, like the video camera is kind of like, part of her body. So like that's kind of one of the things that she kind of takes in. She does a lot of durational shooting. I am always careful about talking about other people's work. So I don't want to like misrepresent Iki's work, like her practice. But she was working on a project called Thoughts for Tomorrow, Movements for Today, which was related to documenting acts of care for the land, especially along like the marshlands in New York City. And she was also interested in working at Coney Island Creek. So we were like, let's just like maybe do some stuff together. So the project was like neither one of like our projects that we were doing separately. I had my open water thing and she had her project, but we had like this intersecting site that we were interested in. And we were also like interested in learning from each other's practice. So that's why we kind of gave a new name to the work that we're doing together. So our project is called Creek, Two Cavities of the Heart. Because I found out that you have two cavities in your heart and like they're called a creek, which is so cool.
I love that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we've done a bunch of work down there. I've learned like an immense amount from working with Iki. We've done a lot of shoreline cleanups and printmaking with the public. And we've done a lot of movement practice down there. We just clean a lot. That's like one of the things. So we've been making material out of garbage and found material that we have gotten down at the shoreline there. And right now we've been kind of experimenting with like this, what we're calling like an archival activation, because Iki has all this video, I have all this audio, and I've made some audio collages, and I also have some of the audio like as text excerpts that I'm interested in. Like, we also, Iki came and volunteered with me in Colombia a little bit too, so we also had this other like watery experience together. So yeah, right now what we've been doing is like kind of like experiments and bringing like media, and sometimes like low tech, just bringing some garbage or photographs. We have slides, like a old school slide projector. So we basically have this like all this these materials. And then like we're kind of interested in like, a lot of the kind of work that we've been doing is really like using our bodies. And so thinking about bringing the archive back into your body, and just this question of like, why do you save these things? Like, what does it mean to collect people's voices? Like, who experiences them later? Like, what is the process of like recontextualizing something and presenting it in a new space, like due to it? Like, does it do anything? Like, just to have an archive, like if no one experiences it, like what's the point? And then like kind of like when you share it, then what happens? Like, do people feel something? Do they go and do something in their life? Do they reflect on their own history? Do they want to like move with you? These are all like kind of things that we're interested in exploring. I'm really interested in my own art practice, just in this idea of spatial transformation and like urban autonomy. So like doing stuff with people in public to change how people feel or think about a space, even in a really ephemeral way. So yeah, we've just been like, could we take Coney Island Creek just through these archival remnants and like bring it somewhere else and like activate it using our bodies, and bringing some of the movement of that place and the movement of like how these materials were collected back into our body, and also using or manipulating this media, overlaying it, using scores, inviting other people sometimes to do stuff with the material, and then just like seeing what we learn. And also just like Iki is very interested in like can this one piece of garbage, if you do spend enough time with it, like doing stuff with your body, like carrying it, like using it for different purposes, like does it become something else? You know what I mean? Like, can you actually transform something into something else? Like, you look at it and you no longer see it as like the thing that you initially just assumed, like, oh, like here is like a piece of old netting. Like, now it could be just have a different purpose. I've been also interested in like the idea of garbage became a large part of our project because there just is so much garbage at Coney Island Creek. So, this idea of garbage as like a burden. And oftentimes, like I saw this a lot when I traveled too, like people dump garbage in the water, and people specifically dump garbage in the water away from like areas that are like, more for like tourism or like recreation, that is like, very noticeable. Whereas in kind of spaces like Coney Island Creek, it's just not like a priority. They don't bring those little garbage sweepers there. And yeah, so just kind of like thinking about transforming the beach, even just by cleaning it. Like, oh, this part of the beach looks different. Like that can just be like a really small spatial intervention, like talking to people. So cleaning the beach is an amazing way to talk to people, because people are like, what are you up to? And you're like, cleaning the beach. And then they're like, okay. So like fishermen are like more excited to like talk to you about like their fish, because there are sometimes people are like, thank you, or they think you're weird. But like I found that just cleaning when I'm traveling too, like I cleaned a little bit on like the Magdalena River, just like as a practice daily when I was visiting Colombia. And yeah, people just are like interested in you, and they're like, what are you doing? And you can have like some cool conversations. So yeah, so that's kind of like Creek. Yeah, like it's really an experimental project, I think, about like your body and how you can use your body to animate an archive, how your body is kind of like this archive. And then like this question of like how do people experience, or like physically, or like using their senses, kind of material from another place, like, and when you bring that material to a new place, like what does it mean? Does it change that place? All of these questions are, I don't have the answer to them, but that's what we like are playing around with, or some of what we're playing around with.
Yeah, I love the play of it all. It just seems like it makes me think of just, I don't know, like it's like rich with play and like exploration. And it like there's a lot of things that I want to comment on. Like I love how cleaning is some sort of activator, like cleaning is a form of stewardship, but it like activates all these kind of different responses. And then also the land gets cleaned, um, then there's that element of like finding trash, but you could turn the trash into something else. Like it's like there's a lot of different layers to like engaging with the land, which I think is really interesting. Because I did watch the video. Was this at Coney Island Creek where people were digging out like this giant street thing? I don't know what you call it. It was like, what do you call those things?
Uh, yeah, like that's one of Viki's pieces. So
Oh.
she had been doing a lot of documentation just of the Parks Department doing stewardship, and we've collaborated with them a bunch. The stewardship team's amazing. So yeah, I don't know, those barrels, like those
Mhm.
bright orange barrels that they use. Yeah, they dug out one of those. Yeah, I mean, that's a really epic video of Viki's. Yeah.
Yeah, because it made me think of like, oh, if I thought that could be something else, maybe that could be a chair. I don't know. I think it's just
Yeah.
nice to think creatively about trash, And also, really quick, Coney Island Creek, is that the bridge that I'm looking at? That's the Verrazano Bridge. Is that
Yeah.
the Verrazano Bridge? I'm like, that's just such a 360 for me because I'm used to the other side of that. I've never been to Coney Island Beach. So it's just kind of interesting to see the other side of that kind of perspective of the bridge. And then also the archival activation. Yeah, I'm really into that because sometimes it seems like memories and archives sort of just, you make it and then it's there and then that's it. And it's like, how do you activate how do you activate memories and archives and, reinvent them? Um, okay, so this is my last question. I know we're kind of going over. Maybe we could have you on another time. I am interested in having like reoccurring guests. So finally, you are part of a newly formed hydrofeminist map collective in New York City. And I'm just curious, what is it all that you explore and where? Um, and also just curious about the story behind the name.
Sure. Yeah, so like, all this water work is connected, especially being like a collaborator. So you end up kind of like like in the same way that like Iki and I just like we're interested in this site and like our projects aren't exactly the same, but then we like overlap here and there. So yeah, the Hydrofeminist Map Collective kind of came out of like a similar thing. A friend of mine who was in New York for a while, who I met doing climate justice activism, is like living in Switzerland right now doing a PhD, and her dissertation is about the state of emergency. And she's interested in kind of like like what does this mean, a state of emergency? Like, because it's like, I think it really captures that there's this idea that like an emergency like occurs suddenly. Like there was like an
Mhm.
emergency, like a fire and it's over, and like someday there might be another emergency. But like what does it mean in climate crisis to like kind of like exist in this like continual state of emergency, and like how do we experience that? So I mean, and again, like I hope I will give like show notes to people's projects so that I don't want to misrepresent it. But that's kind of what I understand Stephanie's kind of lens of her dissertation to be. And so I was interested in working with her because she wanted to write a chapter about Gowanus, where I've spent a lot of time. And, we had kind of connected over that site when she was in New York before. So we corresponded, and she's an architect and she's a wonderful illustrator also. So she kind of experiences things in this visual way. And then my friend Jordan, who had been doing the mapping with me, who I actually met through another performance project. She has like an urban ecology. I think it's like an ecology and like an urban studies ecology background. So she's also like thinking about things in this like pretty visual way. And Andrea, my friend Andrea, who I've collaborated with on other things, who really has more of a like a somatic practice and relation to interspecies um, collaboration and learning. So yeah, so I've worked with all these people in different ways. And then I talked to Estefania about like doing something together. And she had actually worked with, it's just like coincidence. She had worked with, not a coincidence, but it's a small world of people because she had worked with Andrea in Switzerland because she was doing her PhD there. And Andrea is Swiss. You know, they were
Wow.
just like, we're in Switzerland, let's do stuff together. So yeah, so like basically none of us, the four of us hadn't worked together, but like I had worked with Andrea and Jordan, and Andrea had worked with Estefania, and Estefania and I were interested in working together. And then I just like got it. We had talked a little bit, especially with Estefania, about the problem of maps. So the problems of maps, especially in relation to just being like static, like, okay, like a map is like just like almost like a picture of a moment in time. Like it doesn't like accommodate any of like the fluidity
Mhm.
of like actually like space spatial change. And also maps are usually used as like a land management tool. So like here are like this space is like owned by this person, this is like the boundary of this space, you know, you're not allowed to access this space, or this space is designated for this, especially in a place like New York where like all space is like demarcated. And
Mhm.
you know, maps are also dangerous because like everyone would trust them. Do you know what I mean? Like you see a map
Oh,
and
wow.
people are always
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah."
Yes.
And like it was cool like I was looking up some maps in relation to the first event we did, which was in downtown Brooklyn. And I found some archives of like maps from a city plan that was never realized. Like in the late 60s, they were like, oh, let's remake part of downtown Brooklyn and like around, you know, the Fort Greene border. And they made all of these like renderings of what they were going to do. And then there was like the economic collapse. So like you could come across one of these maps and be like decontextualized, be like, oh, like this is like a map. And you're like, no, this was a map of something that never happened. You know, this is just an idea. So yeah,
Wow.
so I'm interested in this, and like also just like the colonial history of maps and like who makes them, like whose perspective is a map. So we talked about this and I was like, this is a really cool idea. And then I don't know exactly why. I think someone maybe like backed out at the last minute, but some folks from Social Practice CUNY like invited me to do a plenary talk at the Creative Time Summit in 2024. It was in September. And the theme was called the States of Emergence. And I was like, this is great. They were like going to give us some money. I was like, can I bring all my friends? Do you need to do this thing? So we just had an opportunity for like to have an audience, to have like a frame to work within, to have a space, to kind of explore something together. So yeah, so we just like to like you know develop this collective idea, and it was around this idea of doing embodied maps. So like taking over space with your bodies with other people, experiencing space using kind of somatic cues that you might not, you know, visiting a space that you might have already know, but like looking at it in a different way. And because we're interested in water, just thinking about your connection to water, even in a place where like water is not that visible, like, you know, thinking about what water table you're in. Like if it rains, like where is the water of the place that you're going, like going to end up, you know, and how is that connected to other places? And also just like in that area that's being like so rapidly gentrified and developed, there's just like all of this like signage about like, you know, like standpipe, you know, there's a standpipe here, or like a water drainage area, and just like a lot of just like water infrastructure that's visible, like that's going to be the inside of a building and stuff that you like normally wouldn't see. So yeah, we did like a map with people, made a map with our bodies, and then we like started to just do drawings that would like hopefully kind of like explode this idea of like what a map is. So we did that, and then we did another more agitational event that we were thinking of as more of an intervention in Gowanus, because we weren't like doing it with an institution. We were like, that's fine. So we did a lot of things with
Mhm.
questions that we had, and we were interested in the idea of toxins, like people thinking about the Gowanus Canal being toxic, and like the idea that we have toxins in our body, and so like thinking about the toxic waters that and fluids that we all have, and like, you know, what that means, where they're like, what legacy is like, it resides in the toxic thing. So one of the questions that I think is really great that Estefania came up with is like, how do we clean without erasing? Um, and thinking about flood memory, also just like not flood, not really being this disruptive thing. Oftentimes flooding is like with Kofi Park, is just water just like reinscribing itself on a landscape. Because like you could look at a map of Gowanus from, you know, from when like when the Dutch first came to colonize it, and we're starting to draw maps, and it's water, you know, and then you can look at a map from later and there's less water, but it's still there, the
Yeah.
water, you know. So yeah, so we did like, just, it was similar. We did a walk, a spatial engagement. It's also a place being rapidly under development. So we were also interested in signage at this point, because there had been so much signage and directional signage, like do this, don't do this, no hard hat, like no people without hard hacks here, like walk this way, one way, like a drawbridge, just like so much signage, informational directional signage in like one block, that was like, whoa. So we made like these big questions on signs, and we wanted to just kind of disrupt the space by putting in some different kinds of signage. So we started doing like, you know, so we did wheat pasting before people gathered. Then we did a walk, and then we had like people annotate and make their own signs, and then hang them up. They told us where we had to hang them up. So we tried to like, I was like putting them on a barbed wire. So it was also like, who's going to experience these signs? Like who's in the space. So that was kind of cool. Like who is like living by this waterway that's being remediated, but there is like a lot of like problems with some of the way that's realized. So it's so interesting. Like we had to meet on a public-private promenade of Whole Foods, because there's no public space in Gowanus
Mhm.
hardly to meet.
Wow.
Um, that's like accessible by train. So we were like, okay, where can we like gather where people could like sit down if they need to, or like get some water? And like we couldn't find any public space. So we have to use like one of these pseudo public spaces. So we're like at Whole Foods, you know, to start the walk. And then like on the walk, you pass like a construction site where someone got really mad that we hung up a sign on their temporary like weird partition thing they put up, and we're like, whatever. You know, then you pass the drawbridge, you cross over the bridge, like there's like the municipal thing, there's a concrete plant that's been there forever, there's like a high-rise residential building going up, and then there's a building that was just empty for a long time that's really a warehouse, and right now it's housing like tons of refugees, mostly from,
Wow.
yeah, mostly from West Africa. And so I've
Wow.
talked to some of them before, and they were like, what are you guys up to? And it was also Gowanus Open Studios that day, which we didn't realize, because there's still a lot of art in Gowanus. So like then people thought we were just like part of Open Studios, which like let us get away with a lot. Like I feel like otherwise people might be like, what are these people doing wheat pasting? But it seemed like official. Someone was like, is your sign about abortion rights? And we were like, yes. You know, it was just like a very random event, and it was really cool because just like people that we don't know just came, and they were like, what's this? And I was like, cool, you know. So it was really interesting. I learned a lot, especially it's like my neighborhood, so it's so cool to do that there and like learn from other people, like what they see and like kind of how they think of the space, and then where we're hanging the signage and who experiences it, and like does it disrupt the space kind of thing. So yeah, and we're doing a winter project, which, you know, I'm excited about. I talked about my cold thing already. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
so we're doing this project with the East River, and kind of where its terminus at the two bays at Flushing Bay and at the Upper Bay in New York, or the harbor there. So yeah, we're just gonna be with the East River. So in the cold. Really, there's only 5 places that you can access it, and arguably 2 of them are really the bay, or like the mouth of the bay. So yeah, so we were like, oh, let's just go and like be where can, and really we just want to know like more about this question for ourselves, like what does it mean to be a hydrofeminist, and you know, standing and like choosing a water body to connect our bodies to, and then the cold as a thing that makes you pay attention in the same way that I was talking about in the water, where you have these kind of alert systems, but also creates maybe like having to have a community of care around gathering in a cold time. So yeah, we're just gonna have like 5 Saturdays where we go south to north and visit the 5 places where you can like touch the East River if you wanted to, so you can without a barrier. Um, Yeah, and we've been talking a little bit about, a lot of other stuff that we've talked about is flooding, but we've also been talking a little bit, and I think we need to explore more whether or not this will be like something that we're going to explicitly bring to the practice, but about how just water is like just making us all think about, the refugee and migration crisis, and like,
Mhm.
who is in
Yeah.
this cold water right now, or who is being like, displaced from a place and like is having like a really like negative experience in water, or who has like a water trauma, like water as this kind of passage. I mean, and it carries so much with like the history of like, enslaved people and the
Mhm.
history of colonialism, just like happening with these just people who are like, well, we have a boat, let's go. So, how much of
Yeah.
this is like,
Mhm.
whether or not you're like, we make it into an explicit part of it, like, I feel like it's really hard to stand near any water right now and really contemplate the water without thinking about these kinds of questions. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're like, what is it to be a hydrofeminist, and thinking about if it has a um, I don't know. It's not like, it's not like we have a politics, like this is what a hydrofeminist is and this is what you'll learn,
Mhm.
but it's sort of like what comes up, I think, when you're connecting to the water and your own water body and, memories and kind of site specific legacy too of like that water.
Well, I really like that question because it feels very open, open to whatever comes up for you, and that's so true. There's like these people are having all types of experiences with water and land and um I it's a it almost what am I trying to say? I don't know. I think it's interesting to like stand near a body of water and like feel the cold of the water. Think of the history of the East River, but it also makes you think about people who are crossing waters to get to another country. Like it just in one water body can take you to so many places. Um, and I'm excited to see what the Hydro Feminist Map Collective um, does now and in the future. And yeah, just love all the questions you've been asking in your personal practice and collaboratively with other folks. I could go on and on, but I want to honor your time and I just want to say thank you so much for meeting me at the through line. And is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I really appreciate all of the work that you're doing too to convene people around water, like around water questions. And I know that you have your own like maritime journey. So I really, I'm really excited that you asked me to have this conversation with you. And yeah, and that you're going to turn this into like a larger project, which I know you always have a lot of larger projects going. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how the podcast like develops, and thank you so much for having me, and it's great to see you.
Yes, thank you. It's great to see you too.